Hey, everybody, welcome back to The Phoenix's Tale, the weekly Harry Potter themed podcast where I am sharing my life story through a chapter by chapter analysis of the entire Harry Potter book series. I am your host, Gabe, and this week we are going to talk chapter 8, The Potions Master. Let's recap. So, um, this chapter we see how Harry's beginning to settle in to Hogwarts. We read a little bit more about the ghosts, the magic staircases and the doors, and how some of the walls pretend to be doors. And we learn about Peeves, Filch, and Mrs. Norris, the secret passages, the classes he's taken, the teachers, including the fact that he was quite right to assume that you don't want to cross Professor McGonagall. And the morning mail delivery by Owl Post during breakfast in the Great Hall every day. Harry is relieved to find that he's on near equal footing with his fellow first years, including Ron, who was born into a wizarding family. It was like Hagrid told him in Diagon Alley that, everybody pretty much starts the same. It doesn't matter if they're muggle born, it doesn't matter if they're from a wizarding family. You're all kind of starting on the same footing, as we quickly see, throughout this chapter as it's described. And we learn more about Snape's hostility toward Harry, although we still don't know why. We do find out at the end of the book. So for those of you who are new to the Harry Potter series and are reading as I'm doing this podcast, we do find out why Snape doesn't like Harry so much toward the end of this book. And I lost my place on my notes. Oh, we learn more about Snape's hostility towards Harry from last week during the welcoming feast, and that Hagrid seems to know something more about it, but refuses to tell Harry. So Hagrid knows what's going on. Obviously, Hagrid knows what's going on, but and finally, we learn more about the break-in at Gringotts that Ron mentioned to Harry on the Hogwarts Express back a couple weeks ago with the chapter platform, the journey from platform 9 3/4. So yeah, Ron mentioned the break-in at Gringotts, and now we're hearing a little bit more about it. So as I mentioned when I closed out last week's episode, I think just roll with it. I've gotten to a point where I am not going to make myself wrong. If I goof up or mess up or trip over my words, unless it's a really big deal and I'm writing down the timestamp of, okay, when I go to do the editing, take this part out, I'm just hitting record and we're just talking. Because I am finding over the last few weeks that I have been doing this and recording my episodes is, number one, it's getting easier for me to stay on track. And number two, I'm finding that just kind of laughing at myself, laughing it off, it's not a big deal, helps me make it not a big deal, if that makes sense. But this week, I do have to admit, this week was a tough chapter for me to write. Because on one hand, there isn't really a lot that I felt connected to initially. I mean, I had to go back and reread this chapter 3 times with my notes, adding to it before I finally got an idea of what we're going to do this week. And I thought we would take it in a different direction this week. So we're going to primarily be talking about bullies and bullying. And we're going to start at the end first. The end being today. And what I have learned throughout my 53 and a half years of life here on planet Earth is that the one thing more often than not, that takes away a bully's power is to simply disconnect it. Um, I want to make something clear here. When I say this, what I'm referring to is that when that person is no longer in your life. And I have two very good examples of that. And one I haven't seen, heard from, vaguely thought about. Uh, shit. It's got to be over 30 years now. And I have been no contact with my father for over 20. So I'm talking about what still keeps us captive, even though these people are not in our lives anymore. That's what I'm talking about as far as their power. Okay. Um, because it's usually, again, I'm drawing on personal experience. I am not a licensed therapist. Everything that I talk about here is my own personal experience, my own personal observations, my own personal tools that I have come up with on my own that have actually helped. Any official psychological conversation we have, such as the one we had last week, or pretty much every episode, because of my bachelor's degree, I do have a bachelor's degree in psychology, so I'm drawing on what I learned from that. One of them is where to look for the proper information. So I am digging into the proper information to give to you. But please do not take this that I am a therapist. I am simply your friend who has lived through a lot of shit and figured a lot of stuff out for myself and figured out a lot of, therapy tools, if you will, that have actually helped me. Okay, so I need you to understand this. This one is very important when we talk about this. So when I was talking about, the people, your bullies, your abusers, we're going to use the term bully, but it's all encompassing for this conversation this week. And I'm talking about once they are no longer part of your life, yet they still control you in some way because of shame, guilt, fear, and you end up keeping quiet and not telling your full story, no matter what they did to you. Okay, that's the power I'm talking about. So stick with me. The first story to illustrate this that I have for you is one that actually originated for me in high school. My primary friend group consisted of myself and three other girls. One of them shared with us at the time, this is, high school. We graduated in 89. So what are we now, 36 years? So 37, 38 years ago, the one friend shared with us about her stepfather's sexual abuse towards her. And even now, I have to admit, was quite a brave move on her part. Even at the time, to be certain. So I do take pride in the fact that as a friend group, we really did have each other's backs. However, as what often happens, we all lost touch after graduation. I moved back to California. Another girl stayed in town. Two went off to college. No, one went to college right away, and the other went into the military and then did college. So we all just kind of scattered after graduation. And we reunited briefly about 30 years later. So this would have been, for us here, 7 years ago. 2018. And after just a few chats about things, it was very clear to me that the friend who shared with us her father or her stepfather sexually abusing her, um, she was still being controlled by her stepfather's abuse, even though he's been dead for ages. That stopped, I believe, just about the time we were all friends in high school, and she graduated, moved out, got her own place. So naturally, things improved for her over the years. But I think that sexual abuse stopped just before or just about the time she came into the friend group. Okay, but it was still holding her captive all these years later. Um, so when I say holding her captive, it wasn't because he was still in her life. He hadn't been since shortly after graduation. Um, but it was still holding her captive up here because it was clear to me that she was was still struggling with it, and that she still feels shame for that, like she was at fault in some way, which is why I have been pushing outside of my comfort zone a bit and telling my own story, because I have found with other pieces of my story, the more that I have shared it with people I could trust to share that with, different friends, co-workers, things like that, over the years, I found that the more I share that, the better I feel, because my bullies no longer have power over me if I can share this so openly with another human being, a new friend, a new romance, a new coworker who we just click, things like that. Um, but let's dig into that a little bit. And I've got the proper evidence. And as always, in my show notes for all of my episodes, any of the information that I get that is outside my personal experience, so all the psychological talk, I give you my sources in the show notes. Because even though I graduated with my bachelor's degree 4 years ago, yeah, let me tell you, drilling it into my head, you have to have your proper sources. You have to have proper resources. You can't use Wikipedia and shit like that. You have to have proper resources and cite your references and blah, 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 blah. It's still there. Anyway, let's talk about why telling your story will help you. Because I know there are so many of you out there like me. I was held hostage for years by my past, my childhood, my father's bullying through his abusive and emotionally immature behaviors. Okay. So I've had my moments where I didn't want to talk about this shit at all because I felt like I did something wrong. This is common, especially when we're talking about any form of childhood abuse, neglect, etc. So here's why telling your story to the right people, even if it's just one person, why it helps you. Number one, reclaiming control. Sharing your story, whether with trusted friends, a therapist, or even publicly, can be a way to reclaim control over your narrative. Instead of letting the bully or abuser define your experience, you define it for yourself. Because, yes, there was a time where I thought I was the problem, as all children do. And all abused, neglected, gone through a traumatic experience children as adults hang on to that because that's just natural development. Number two, it helps you break the cycle of shame. Shame thrives in secrecy. And now I hear Simon and Garfunkel, silence like a cancer grows. It does. It becomes a cancer. And if you can't share your story and the shit that you've been through with at least one trusted human being, it's going to hold you captive and affect every aspect of your life. And I am living proof of that. That's why at the age of 53, I'm finally figuring shit out for myself. Is because I allowed myself to be held captive by that for so long. Breaking the cycle of shame. Shame thrives in secrecy. When you speak openly about what happened, you challenge the idea that you have something to hide or be ashamed of. This act alone can be incredibly liberating. Yes. Yes, 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 yes. It is not your fault. Anything that happened to you as a child that has negatively impacted your adulthood and who you are was not your fault. You did not deserve that. End of discussion. As you can tell, I'm a bit emotional about this one and passionate about this one. Building connection and empathy. Telling your story can help others understand what you've been through, and it often inspires them to share their own experiences. That is why I am here. I know I have not been getting any views on my podcast right now, even though it's all public on YouTube. I don't care at this moment because I know it's going to take time to gain some traction, but I also know the benefit of following certain people that we tend to follow on social media across the board, not just here on YouTube. TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, any of the new apps that are coming out, Skylight, Neptune. Excuse me. I got a personal story to share, and I'll do that at the end. But we're going to come back to that building connection and empathy. When you stumble upon somebody, I know this to be true from your perspective, watching me and listening to me speak right now, that hearing somebody else's story, when it resonates with you and you just know, holy shit, that person knows what I've been through. Even though it's a one-way conversation, they're telling the story. I follow them on social media and hear the story. They have no idea I exist. Can still be incredibly, incredibly powerful for you. And that is why I'm here. Because I know somewhere out there, somebody's going to see this podcast. Somebody's going to hear my story. Or even a piece of my story. And it's going to help them immensely. That is what I want to put to the universe. I want to help people. And I start by sharing my story. Anyway, where am I? It often inspires them to share their... Okay, this creates a sense of community and mutual support, which is essential for healing. And let me tell you, again, even though it might be one-sided because of social media, it still has incredible power. Number 4, reducing the bully's power. By refusing to let your experience be a source of isolation or silence, you deny the bully or abuser the power to define your self-worth or identity. I'm going to change that to and your self-identity. Their actions become part of your story, but not the whole story. So when we share our stories, we take the first step in breaking the hold that bullies or abusers have over us. And even years later. So you're going to learn if you keep listening to the podcast here. I'm going to keep sharing it. Yeah. I'll talk more about that at the end because I have a story on that. Like I said, it's not just about cutting them out of our lives, it's about reclaiming our own narrative and refusing to let shame or silence be their legacy. So, let me share with you some of the horrors I've dealt with over the years now that I am sharing my story with my full chest. Obviously, the first bully I had right out of the gate was my very own father. I ran a list of behaviors he engaged in through my AI tool called Perplexity. Um, I'm going to double check and make sure that I put that in the show notes because I absolutely love that over ChatGPT, Google Gemini, I think it is, and Microsoft. Is that Copilot? What those types of things. Anyway, I ran his list of behaviors that as best as I could remember. And here's what Perplexity said. And this does align with information I've gotten from actual therapists and psychologists over the years about my father, just in general conversation, etc. So, as a perpetrator was emotionally abusive, consistently belittling, berating, or insulting a child, setting unrealistic expectations, and invalidating the child's emotions or experiences are hallmark behaviors of emotional abuse. I never said that. Was one that popped into my head that I remember my father saying a lot. Emotional neglect. Failing to provide adequate emotional support, affection, or validation, and being unconcerned with the child's emotional needs. I cannot imagine, because I've never had a genuine heart to heart conversation with my father ever. I don't know why that popped into my head just now with that particular section, but it did. Anyway, authoritarian controlling personality traits. So, demanding that a child conform to the parent's narrative, beliefs, or desires. The more practical French discussion we had a while back when I was first going back to school after high school and I wanted to take German. Yeah, there we go. And reacting with anger or hostility when the child expresses autonomy or disagreement. Yeah, felt that one. Emotional immaturity, difficulty regulating emotions, frequent losing control, unpredictable anger, and an inability to empathize with or validate the child's feelings. Yeah. 100% score so far. Possible narcissistic personality traits. Again, based on what I hear from actual PhD types about narcissistic personality disorder, there are some missing key factors with my father, I would argue. So if I were the licensed PhD therapist, had all the education, etc., I would not, at this point, I would not label him as a narcissist because, like I said, he's missing some of the key takeaways, the key symptomology, the key behaviors, if you will. But um, narcissistic tendencies can be labeled. Insisting on being right, needing to control the family's narrative, lack of empathy, and making everything about their own perspective are often associated with narcissistic tendencies. While an official diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder requires formal assessment, these traits are consistent with narcissistic patterns. So there's a consistency there. But like I said, the best that I can remember, conversations with my brothers over the years, I would, if I were the PhD licensed therapist, I would not diagnose my father this way because he's missing a couple of the key pieces. Manipulation and broken promises. I remember this one. Making empty promises and using manipulation to control or disappoint children is a common feature in emotionally abusive dynamics. I wouldn't necessarily say that it was manipulation on my father's part. I think it was just a seriously high level of emotional immaturity. The way he grew up, it wasn't a very warm, loving, huggy, fun kind of family. It just was not. My grandfather was a mean drunk. I mean, I don't think he had a single atom of happiness and love and joy in his body. Oh, my grandfather. So, the manipulation on my father's part, I would say probably not so much, because I don't remember anything that I could confidently put under that, but definitely the broken promises. I mean, one in particular still stands out to this day. I'm still waiting for the boombox he promised me when I was in junior high school. I wanted one with a CD player, a single cassette, double cassette would have been better, and then of course the radio. My mom eventually got me one after I graduated high school, I believe. But I never got the boombox I wanted from my dad that he promised me when I was in junior high. So for me, that was 11, 12, 13 years old. Still waiting for it, Dad. And then, of course, verbal abuse, using regular insults, shouting, humiliation as discipline or communication. Now we are going to talk about somebody, and I need a code name for her. We'll come up with a code name for her. But for now, we'll call her ex-best friend. My second bully, one of the biggest ones I had throughout my life, was my so-called best friend from junior high school. And let me tell you, she was a piece of work. But let's run through the list of shit that she did that I can remember to the best of my ability here, before diving into some of them a bit deeper. I was frequently shamed by her. I mean, she always had those snarky remarks about not having cable television. Now, for those of you younger than, I would say, the older end of the millennials, so roughly 1985, if you were born before 1985 and earlier, you'll probably remember and understand what I'm talking about. Those of you who are younger, certain parts of the country, certain towns, a lot of people in rural areas could not have cable television. And at the time, this was before Dish and DirecTV, the satellite. Those fuckers were expensive. So we had 3 channels that we could get in fairly regularly: CBS, ABC, and PBS. And when I was in junior high, we finally, where I lived in California, in the Redding, Chico area, finally got an NBC affiliate. But that didn't happen until I was about 13, 14 years old. So before that, when did we actually get cable? I don't think we ever actually got cable until my mom and I, after I graduated, were back in California. So I was probably about 21, something like that. And I had my first full-time job. So she and I got a little apartment that we shared. That was the first time we had cable. So I was in my early 20s before we had cable television. So guess who shamed me a lot for that? Because she had it, I didn't, and always called it caveman TV. I had caveman TV. Yeah, if she's watching this, fuck you, bitch. I was often mocked by my lack of sexual experience. I was 21 years old before my first sexual experience. We were in junior high, and she's mocking me for my lack of sexual experience, bragging about her own sexual experiences, some of which I will admit seemed exaggerated or even outright fabricated. But I also know things that I really wish I didn't know. And that was all while we were in junior high. Sharing stories about cool things that happened to her even when I knew they weren't true. She claimed to have been, I think I get into this a little later. Let's just wait. Let's just wait. Um, she often told stories in a way that made them difficult to dispute and left me with no recourse, because I remember the first time I called her out on her bullshit because it sounded like bullshit and I knew enough about the surrounding events that she was trying to convince me this certain event happened. You know, the first words out of her mouth, "Well, prove it." I couldn't prove it, except that I'm autistic and already exhibiting, hypervigilance, and my pattern recognition skills were off the charts. And I knew you were lying, but I couldn't prove it. So I stopped trying to prove it. I'll get her one of these days. Actually, I don't give a shit. I hope she's miserable. Um, and I don't mean to be a bitch about that, but she ultimately made my life miserable, and I believe karma is eventually served at some point. Um, Publicly mocked my naivete or innocence, always used my lack of knowledge or experience as material for ridicule. The caveman TV, my lack of sexual experience at the age of 12. Always stayed at my house for sleepovers, though, however, because she didn't like to be at home with her parents. Starting to see some things here. Created a social dynamic where I felt isolated or like I had no other friends to spend time with. Used lies and exaggerations to boost her own social status. Basically, she felt better about herself, uh, you know, insulting me or downplaying my experiences, or, all the things that I had listed. And then targeting my vulnerabilities for mockery or put downs, because that's how she felt better about herself. That's the truth. So, throughout my adolescence and my early adulthood, my friendship with her was definitely marked by constant undercurrent of ridicule and manipulation that deeply affected my sense of self. She frequently shamed me for things beyond my control, like the not having cable television, or mocking me for my lack of sexual experience. Her stories about her own life were often exaggerated or outright fabricated and were designed to make her seem more worldly and impressive because, like I said, that's how she felt better about herself. One particularly striking, oh, yeah. One example of this was that when she dropped out of high school. She ended up getting her GED eventually, I think, last I heard. But she dropped out of high school. But when she was still in high school, that she had an affair with one of her teachers. If you saw what this woman looks like, um, yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that. Um, yeah, I don't know what to think about that. I really don't know what to think, because I I don't know what to think. I don't like body shaming anybody, and I certainly wouldn't body shame her. But just what I knew, especially what I knew at the time about men, and you got that kind of creepy teacher. I could kind of see it happening, but for the most part, I don't think it did. Like I said, she just exaggerated so much to the point where I really didn't believe anything she had to say unless I personally witnessed it with her, if that makes sense. Uh, yeah. Um, anyway, she really had a knack for telling stories in ways that made me unable to dispute them. You know, the first prove it, which I couldn't, knowing I wouldn't have the means or the confidence to call her out again. My innocence and naivete were regular targets for her public mockery, and she never missed an opportunity to use my vulnerabilities, whether it was my family situation. My parents were split up by then, and things financially were difficult. Um, she and her parents and her younger brother were a welfare family, and somehow they always had more than we did. Yeah. Um, it was just all ammunition for her, basically. And the result was a friendship. I'm going to use my finger quotes because it obviously wasn't a friendship, where I often felt isolated, belittled, and unsure of myself. And she used insults and exaggerations to boost her own self esteem more often than not at my expense. So, long story short, should have said that part earlier, sorry, but she dumped on me to make herself feel better, is what it was. So, when I look at both my father's behaviors and those of my so called best friend from junior high school, my understanding of bullying long before I ever read about Harry's experiences at Hogwarts, um, yeah, I had a very crystal clear understanding of bullies and bullying, and the moments that Harry felt throughout this chapter of being unfairly blamed that Neville got his potion wrong, um, of being ridiculed and mocked publicly in the class for not knowing things on the first day of class, even though, you know, he did read through some of his books, but, you know, he wasn't Hermione Granger. He wasn't, you know, reading everything and memorizing everything by heart. And, you know, it was just, it was very clear that Snape was just, excuse me, that Snape was targeting him and bullying Harry. And, you know, as such, it's not such an uncomfortable chapter for me to read when I'm, you know, just letting myself be in the story. But like I said at the beginning of this episode, that this was a difficult one for me to write because once I dove into this, it took several attempts to research, to read and make notes before this idea all came to fruition in my head, as far as we're going to talk about bullies and bullying. Um, so, yeah, those two things alone, you know, my father, that so called best friend from junior high, really shaped my understanding of bullying and how horrible it is to be on the receiving end of that. My father's unpredictable anger, constant criticism, emotional neglect, and broken promises created a home environment where I was always on edge, never knowing if what I did would be good enough, and more often than not, it wasn't. And I would be met with insults and disappointment and a lot of yelling from him. Similarly, you know, this best friend, she used shame, public mockery, and fabricated stories to assert her control and boost her own self esteem at my expense, leaving me feeling isolated and unsure of myself. So when I read through this chapter to do the research for this, I recognized the echoes of these dynamics in Harry's first encounters with Professor Snape, but I found it quite difficult connecting because of the specifics. Pacific is an ocean. Specifics. Um, but then I started thinking maybe this is a much bigger wound that I just wasn't ready to cleanse yet so that the healing process could begin. But I'm pushing through because I don't want this shit to control my life anymore. I am so fucking sick and tired of it. Um anyway, so we see Snape singling Harry out, asking him impossible questions and seeming to take pleasure in Harry's discomfort with all of this. Publicly criticizing and humiliating him in front of his peers, just as my father and ex best friend did to me in different ways. And as I mentioned earlier, the specifics may differ, but the feeling is familiar, very familiar, which is why this one was a difficult one for me to get into. The powerlessness of being targeted by someone who holds authority or social influence and does so as viciously as Snape does in this chapter, as viciously as my father and that ex best friend did to me in my life. Um, the sting of being made to feel small for things that are outside of my control, and the confusion of trying to understand why I'm being singled out at all. Jealousy. I recognized that there was a lot of jealousy on both my father's and my ex best friend's parts. Um, I had something that they recognized that they didn't have in themselves. The sad fact of the matter, it's taken me it took me several decades to get to a point where I started recognizing that. So anyway, this week I felt compelled to focus my episode on these personal stories because, like Harry, I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of unfair treatment. I think we all do. And to carry those experiences long after the moment has passed. And while Snape's bullying is central to this chapter, it's the broader theme. The impact of those who use their power to belittle or control others is what resonated so deeply with me. And I hope with all of you out there who have faced the bullies in your life, who are dealing right now with bullies in your life, yeah, so I'm trying to think. We're about ready to close out the chapter here. I'm looking at my notes. I'll go back and tell the story in a minute. Let me finish with this. So I know that this week was a darker topic. I do apologize for that. If I've upset you, if I've triggered you, that was not my intention. But we need to start having these conversations so that our bullies, even though they may no longer be in our life and haven't been for decades, will still control you if you don't talk about it, if you don't share your story with somebody else. Again, a therapist, a trusted friend. Start talking on social media. You'll find the right people who need to hear it. But this is something that has to be addressed if you ever hope to heal those wounds. Just like high school best friend and the sexual abuse by her stepfather is still controlling her. It was very clear to me that it was. Because she doesn't talk about it. When I suggested she take that to therapy because of what I was seeing, she completely lost her mud and, oh, how dare you, bring that up. But it's still controlling you. You have not healed that. Take that to therapy. That's why I'm bringing it up, is because I care. And she just which tells me that I was right. It was still controlling her, and she needed to deal with that. And the whole reason why she went back to therapy in 2018 when the fallout happened. So, something that I want to say to you guys is, please do not ever dismiss or gaslight yourself into thinking that any of the shit that you have been through, especially when there are people, there's probably someone or a couple of someones that you are thinking about right now as you hear me speak and share this particular story. What they did to you was an enormous deal. Don't gaslight yourself or dismiss it. Okay? Um, because more often than not, um, yeah. Sorry, my brain just goes. So please don't dismiss your experience. Do not gaslight yourself into thinking it was no big deal, because more often than not, the research does show that the effects of being bullied as a child can be as damaging as other forms of child adversity, with impacts that persist for decades. Um, Adults who were bullied or abused as children are at significantly higher risk for depression, anxiety disorder, psychological distress, and even suicidal ideation well into midlife. This this one is very personal to me because I have seen the positive effects of stumbling my way through so much and starting to share those stories. I think was key for me in healing a lot of the shit from my father. Because I had a good run of it. I would say once I started back to school, so, mid 20s to until about my mid to late 30s, there were some ups and downs, I'm not going to lie to you. But on the whole, for the first time in my life, that, roughly 15-year period was probably the best at that point before things started going to shit again. um, but it was because I was able to have those safe spaces with other people to start sharing my story. And the more I did, the better I felt. And the less embarrassed, the less shame, the less guilt I felt. Thinking I had done something wrong or that I had deserved it in any way. No, 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 no. No child deserves the bullshit that they lived through. They didn't ask for it. It was not their fault. And the only way to start healing is to start sharing. So, let's go back real quick. This is going to be a longer episode, and I apologize, and I've been kind of pausing a lot, and I know I have, and I hope that you forgive me on that. Because, like I said, this has been a big episode for me, from the research to the writing and now to recording it. This has been a big episode for me to come to terms with and organize my thoughts. Let's go back, though, to what we were talking about earlier as to why I'm here. I have a story Recently, there's a particular content creator on TikTok that I have been following for over a year now. Um, I joined TikTok probably 2 or 3 weeks before he popped up on my For You page. And this is somebody who very quickly I determined, again, hypervigilance, pattern recognition, all the things that come with my autism and that were created mixing the autism with my childhood abuse and trauma that I lived through. Um, Very intelligent, funny as hell, well read, very articulate. But he has also been quite vulnerable in sharing parts of his story. Specific to my PTSD is where I feel that connection with him because his experiences that he has shared on TikTok over the last year and a half or so that I've been following him resonate most strongly with my own. And in listening to his stories, I find myself not just bawling my eyes out because, yeah, I get it. I'm bawling my eyes out because I'm recognizing that there's another human being out there who gets it. Like, if I were to tell him my experiences and my stories, he would feel the same way about hearing my story as I do about hearing his. There's a connection there, there's an understanding there. And I know a lot of you out there probably have already gotten to the point where oh, I need to start sharing my story. Somebody out there needs to hear it. I want to encourage you to do that. And that is why when I jokingly said earlier that nobody's probably at this point on July 8th as I'm recording this, nobody's watching my podcast, I don't care. At least not right now. It will reach the right people when it needs to reach the right people. And I firmly trust that because I have found, again, this content creator, for somebody as socially isolated as I am, I've got 3 people in my life. That's it. None of them are emotional safe spaces for me to discuss these things. Number one, my son is not my therapist, so he's automatically off the list. So that leaves my baby brother and my mom. Baby brother doesn't care. When I try to start taking a conversation down these more serious, more personal paths, oh, suddenly he's got to go check on something or do something, so he's out. He doesn't give a shit. He won't sit and listen. My mother, she tries, but her brain, I don't know what's going on with her brain, that she goes down these different paths and she starts these conversations on topics that I'm sure in her mind are related, but have absolutely nothing to do with what I'm trying to talk about. And it frustrates me to the point where essentially she's not listening. She's trying to get to a conclusion. I don't know what the hell she thinks about this. On top of the fact that I don't trust her. She's got a big mouth. Even when I tell her this stays between us, no, somebody finds out. And eventually I find out. And the only way that I find out that she didn't keep her mouth shut is because the person she told comes to me and says something about it. And she's the only one they could have heard it from. Because at this point in my life, you want to talk about hyper independence? I do not. What I'm sharing with you is probably the most vulnerable I've been in a long time because I feel confident that the people who need to hear my story, who will benefit much as I benefit from that content creator on TikTok, and it's helped me over the last year and a half, just knowing that if I could talk to him, he would get it. Just knowing somebody would understand, even though they don't hear my story, they don't know I exist. That's why it's important, and I want to encourage all of you out there to start sharing your stories. Take away the power that your bullies still have over you. put it out there because somebody else is going to need to hear it. As much as I needed to hear his stories, I know somebody out there needs to hear my story. Other people out there need to hear your story. Start telling your story. So, we are going to leave it at that. Again, my apologies for such a deep topic. And I highly suggest that if this episode has really landed hard for you, as hard as it did for me trying to research and write this, please seek help. Okay? I'm talking therapy. I'm talking a true blue trusted friend who will keep their mouth shut. Go do something fun for yourself. It doesn't matter what anybody thinks. If it's fun for you, do it. Find a way to ground yourself. Go for a walk, do a workout, do anything to get those emotions out of your body. For me, it's doing my workouts and sitting down and getting something done for my podcast and sticking to my routine for my daily chores. Oh, I got a clean kitchen for the next week. Oh, my laundry's done for the next week. Whatever it is that feels good to you, whatever it is that is fun for you, talk to anybody you absolutely trust on this. Do not let this go, and do not sit and stew with this alone. Three people in my life, and none of them I can talk to about a number of things that would have helped me probably heal faster and get back on my feet faster, even if I just had a best friend to talk to. Okay? Do not let this go. Do not sit with it. Do something with it. Talk to somebody, go for a walk, do something fun, watch something, read something that makes you laugh. Whatever feels right to express what you might be feeling from this episode. Do not do it alone. Okay? Yeah. Like I said, this was a tough one for me. So today I'm going to give myself permission to binge watch something. I don't know what yet. Probably Mystery Science Theater 3000. That one's been helping me a lot. Kind of pick me up and, ooh. While I sit and edit, this episode and then the last episode. Like I said, in the last episode, I got off track. It should have been posted January 2nd. Today's July 2nd. Today is July 8th. This episode is due tomorrow. I want to get it up, but now I've got two, so I'm going to be doing that. But I'm going to be doing it watching Mystery Science Theater 3000. So, journaling's another good one. Talk about it on social media if you feel comfortable. Anything that will help get it out of your head. That's what I'm going to do for the rest of the day today. And tomorrow, I think the first thing I'm going to do is get my 3-mile walk in the morning. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, thank you for joining me this week. Thank you for bearing with me for this being a heavier episode for me. Next week, we are going to talk about Chapter 9, The Midnight Duel. And until then, Potter fans, I really hope you have a good week. Start sharing your story and don't let the bullies control your life anymore. All right? I love you. I'll see you next week.